So there's this massive legal battle brewing in the world of rugby. We're talking about hundreds of former players taking on the sport's governing bodies in a landmark case. They're alleging that a failure to protect them from head injuries has led to some absolutely devastating, life-altering brain diseases. We're going to break down this legal showdown, which honestly could change the face of rugby forever.
And make no mistake, this isn't just another lawsuit. A deep legal analysis of the case actually quotes insiders who are calling this an existential crisis for the game. I mean, the stakes could not be higher. This affects everyone, from the top professional athletes all the way down to the kids just playing on a Saturday morning.
And the human cost here, it's just staggering. We're talking about former athletes, many of them only in their 40s, being diagnosed with these awful neurodegenerative diseases. Things like early onset dementia, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, you might know it as CTE, and even motor neuron disease. These are conditions that tragically just alter everything: personalities, memories, movement.
So, for the players to actually win their case, they have to clear a series of pretty monumental legal hurdles. You can think of it like a legal gauntlet they have to run. In this explainer, we're going to walk through each one of them. First, establishing a duty of care, then proving it was breached, trying to solve the incredibly tricky causation puzzle, and finally, looking at what the finish line might look like.
All right, let's dive right into the first and, maybe the most fundamental hurdle of all. Do the governing bodies even have a legal responsibility, what the law calls a duty of care, to protect players from these kinds of long-term injuries in the first place?
You see, the entire question really hinges on this one distinction. In the eyes of the law, did the governing bodies actively cause harm through their actions, or did they just fail to step in and help? It sounds like a small difference, but legally that distinction is absolutely everything.
Okay, so here's the deal. The law is pretty clear about punishing a positive act that causes harm, but it's way more reluctant to punish an omission, basically a failure to act. And the players' case is arguing that the governing bodies failed to change the rules to improve safety, which is a classic omission. And that makes their legal path a whole lot harder.
So how on earth do the players get around that omission problem? Well, the key is a legal concept called assumption of responsibility. The players are going to argue that by setting the rules of the game, creating safety protocols, and basically controlling the entire sport, the governing bodies voluntarily took on the job of protecting player safety.
And to see this in action, we can actually look to a famous case involving the boxer Michael Watson. The court ruled that the British Boxing Board of Control did have a duty of care. And why? Because the board sponsored, encouraged, and controlled an activity where injury is, and this is a direct quote, the foreseeable, indeed inevitable consequence. The parallel to rugby here is incredibly powerful, and it really forms the bedrock of the player's claim.
Okay, so let's say the players clear that first hurdle. Let's say a court agrees there is a duty of care. Well, now they face their second hurdle, proving that the governing bodies actually breached that duty by failing to act reasonably, given what was known about the risks at the time.
I mean, as early as 1997, a major neurology academy was already reporting that repeated concussions cause cumulative damage. Yet it wasn't until 2015, that's nearly 2 decades later, that World Rugby introduced its formal head injury assessment protocol. You can bet the players' lawyers are going to point to that gap, arguing that any reasonable body, knowing about the growing scientific evidence, should have acted much, much sooner.
All right, now we come to what the source material describes as the players' biggest challenge of all: causation. They have to somehow prove that the governing body's specific failures directly caused their specific disease, sometimes decades after they stopped playing. This is, you can imagine, incredibly difficult to do.
The standard legal test here is called the but-for test. A player has to stand up in court and convince them, but for the governing body's failure to implement better safety rules, I would not have developed this disease. Now, given that neurodegenerative diseases can have all sorts of potential causes, genetics, other lifestyle factors, proving that direct link is a massive, massive challenge.
But, and this is a big but, the law isn't totally rigid. It actually has a few workarounds for these super complex cases. The players have 3 potential paths around that strict but-for test. First, they can try to use statistics to show the negligence more than doubled their risk of getting the disease. Second, they can argue it made a material contribution to the damage, meaning the failures were a significant part of a cumulative problem. Or third, they could argue it materially contributed to the risk of injury, a subtle but really important legal distinction. Each path is complex, for sure, but it gives them a fighting chance.
So, imagine the players have cleared all of those massive hurdles. They're not home free just yet. They still aren't at the finish line, because now we have to consider the defenses the governing bodies might try to raise.
Now, the two most obvious defenses would be, 1, that players voluntarily assume the risk of playing a tough sport, or 2, that they somehow contributed to their own injuries. But the source article we're looking at suggests that both of these will probably fail in a UK court. Why? Well, you can't consent to a risk you aren't fully informed about. And it would be a really tough sell to try and blame a player for making a bad decision while they're suffering from the very brain injury that messes with their judgment.
So where does all this leave us? Well, the legal analysis basically concludes that while the challenges are immense, the players actually have a real path to victory. The case is what they call finely balanced, but thanks to legal precedents and just a growing mountain of scientific evidence, the barriers are not, as the authors put it, insurmountable.
And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Win or lose, this lawsuit is forcing a reckoning. It's asking whether the very nature of this beloved, brutal sport is compatible with the long-term health of the people who play it. Can rugby save itself without fundamentally changing the game that we all know? That is the question that's going to hang over the sport for years to come.